So let's look a little bit more closely at the fall of Constantinople here. Constantine the 11th is going to do some things to prepare for the siege. Constantine the 11th was aware of the danger that Constantinople was in. The Ottoman Empire had been growing steadily. And in fact, Constantinople had been a very busy city. But that was changing. As the Ottoman Empire was growing, people were becoming concerned and they were moving out, not just from Constantinople, but from the whole Byzantine Empire. And Constantine the 11th wanted to protect his city from destruction. Constantinople is set up like a triangle. There's one wall along the land. It's a very straight wall. Then you have two walls on water, lower walls because there's water there, but still, it's much harder to get in there. And then they had this thing called the Golden Horn, which was like a bay. And near that, right, not too far away, was another little town connected to them, and fortified as well, small but fortified. And what Constantine did was he had a great chain installed at the entrance to that Golden Horn so that they could pull the chain, and the chain would block ships from being able to enter the Golden Horn. And so that meant that Constantinople now only had to defend two sides, one by land and one by sea. But Constantine the 11th was hoping for more, right? He hoped to get help from Western Europe. There had been many crusades up to this point, but the crusades had died off because of the 100 Years' War and other various wars that were going on in Western Europe. But Constantine the 11th thought that if he could heal this division in the church that happened at the Great Schism in 1054, if he could heal that and restore the unity of the church, that he might be able to get some countries to send him some armies, and that might be enough men, just enough men, to help him to defend Constantinople. So, Florence was more than a city at that time. It was a very powerful country within Italy. The Council of Florence started in 1438, ended in 1439. It produced what was called the Union of Florence, in which Constantine the 11th submitted to the Roman Mass. So the whole leavened, unleavened bread distinction, he submitted to the Roman Mass. He took it directly from the Pope himself, submitting to the Pope's authority. He agreed to the Filioque Clause. He submitted to the authority of the Pope entirely. The other two parts of the disagreement in 1054 were now essentially moot. Constantine the 11th then hoped that another crusade would come to assist him, and the Pope tried to call a crusade. Providentially, the timing was just not possible, as well as I think the Pope there soon passed away. Another Pope came to power. But nevertheless, there just was not the momentum to get it done. The Western Church had too many problems of their own. They were in their own battles. The 100 Years' War was going on. Spain couldn't send anybody because they still weren't even Spain yet, right? Isabella and Ferdinand, who were going to unite Spain and defeat the Emirate of Granada, had not done that yet. So Constantine was trying, though. He was planning, he was preparing, he was doing everything he could. He did truly feel that he had been called to this task as emperor, now only of a city. But he hearkened back to all of his ancestors for thousands of years and wanted to be faithful to do his job. They did receive aid from the Republic of Genoa. Now, the Genoese were mercenaries, but Giovanni Giustiniani brought 700 brave men from the Republic of Genoa, and those men played quite the part in defending Constantinople. But there was an attitude that was developing, which was really not good. So Constantine the 11th had gone and created this Union of Florence, and the reaction when he came back, the attitude of the people in the East, as well as the Eastern Church itself, was, well, better the turban than the tiara. Better to have the Ottoman Turks take over than receive assistance from the Western Church. Considering what the Ottomans were going to do to those in the city of Constantinople and the towns surrounding, it's surprising that these people would not be more welcoming to the Union of Florence, right? But it just goes to show you grudges die hard, and grudges are sinful and wrong, and sin never makes sense. It never makes sense. The Ottoman Turks begin their siege. In 1453, Mehmed II was 21 years old. The only place left unconquered within his territory was Constantinople. Constantine XI was the emperor of only a city now, but he still commanded the Byzantine army of roughly 7,000 men. Constantinople at its height held 800,000 people, but now it was nearly a ghost town with only about 5,000 people in it. They left mostly due to the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turks had roughly 100 ships and 90,000 men at their disposal. Their navy was not very good yet, but they did have quite a few small ships. The fall of Constantinople begins. Orban created a giant cannon. He invented this thing. It was massive, and they could fire these huge cannonballs. You could only fire about 3 a day, but the wall there, the Theodosian wall, was so thick in Constantinople that no other cannon could bring down that wall. But this cannon could. It could fire it for a long enough distance, at a fast enough speed, and it was putting holes in the wall. Now, because it took so much time between shots, right? They couldn't just go bang, bang, bang. They could fire it 3 times a day, basically. Because it took so much time between shots, Giovanni Giustiniani and his men were able to begin rebuilding, not perfectly, but rebuilding the wall so that the wall would still remain a wall. So then the Ottomans turned to another thing to do. They built some mines. They wanted to bring down the walls. If you can explode, you build a mine under the wall, you explode that mine, it then puts enough pressure on the wall that the wall falls in, right? Well, there was a man named Johannes Grant, and he had these buckets of water, and he also knew a lot about mines and stuff, and so he set these buckets of water up, and he could figure out by how the ripples were in the water where when those buckets were right above where the mines were being built. And with that knowledge, they were able to foil that plot. So that didn't work. There was one point where there was a breach on the wall, and Giovanni Giustiniani and his 700 men had to jump out there and push them back and fight them off. Giovanni Giustiniani and his men were quite brave and very capable strategically. So when you're fierce, but also you're wise when it comes to fighting, it's amazing how few people can hold off such a huge number. And then they went back right into the wall and were able to fill up that hole and keep them out. There was also a situation where a few ships from Genoa slipped past the Ottoman fleet into the Golden Horn. So they lowered the chain to let the boats in, and then they raised the chain again, and the Ottoman fleet was not able to get in there. And so Mehmed II was angry. He was irate at this. He almost killed his admiral over this. One of the things that the Ottoman Turks would do is they would they would inspire fear both in their enemies and in their soldiers. And so for his admiral to not have stopped, for 100 ships, to not have stopped those few ships, I think it was 3, getting through, may have been 5, but that made Mehmed II so angry. And he did spare him, did not kill him, but still sent the admiral away, and the admiral did not keep his job. But Mehmed, frustrated with this, said, you know what, there's this little corner over here. You have that sound, that gap of water, there's this little corner over here. And I'm going to go ahead. He just got his men. They cut out a lane from that forest that was over there. They then took those trees and turned them into logs, and they greased up the logs. They picked their boats up, and again, one of the things the Ottoman Turks were great at was they could move quite a force of men. Right, those men could do a lot, and so if you just needed brute strength, the Ottoman Turks, they were great at just pulling off anything that required brute strength. And so he just had his men pick up the boats, put them on the logs, and push them over into the Golden Horn. So now he had his ships there too, and that great chain that was protecting and guarding the Golden Horn was no longer guarding it, and Constantinople could be attacked on all 3 sides now. During the siege, the Ottomans lost about 20,000 men. But in the end, the Ottomans did get into a small section of the city, and they hoisted their flag as quickly as possible. And it appeared to the guards on the wall that part of the city had fallen. It hadn't quite really fallen. It was just this one tower, essentially, this one little element that could have been contained, and those Ottomans essentially had no access to the city from where they were at. But when the soldiers saw those flags flying from that tower, fear struck them, and they began to retreat, thinking that the city had been breached and taken. Constantine XI, brave man, led his men in their final battle. He took off his royal robes, and he stood with his armor just like a normal soldier, and he led his men, as few as they were, against the Ottomans. Now, his body was never found. He went down fighting. And it's a brave end. Rare is the emperor who dies on a battlefield. Very rare is the emperor who dies on a battlefield. One person said that the city of wisdom becomes the city of ruins. Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire finally fell on May 29th, 1453, after a history that started with Augustus Caesar and then was made Christian by Constantine, and now ended with Constantine XI Palaeologus. A wonderful part of history had come to an end.